In 2012, she stood alone in a hospital parking lot. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, not from cold, but from a grief she didn't yet understand. She had just ended a pregnancy she hadn't planned with a partner she didn't trust. No one knew. There were no goodbyes, no rituals, no meaning, only silence. And in that silence, she decided it had all been a mistake. But she was wrong. 10 years later, she became a counselor for women facing the same impossible choice. And one day, sitting across from a girl who could barely speak through her sobs, she recognized her own story. Not just the pain, the strength, the clarity that grew beneath it. And for the first time, she saw the shape of something she didn't know she'd been building all along. That's the unbearable part about life. It doesn't reveal itself while you're living it. The story doesn't explain itself in real time. It just keeps moving. And we're left trying to interpret events that haven't finished becoming what they're meant to be. We want meaning now. We want closure now, but life doesn't work that way. What it gives us is something more fragile, more honest the next moment. And in that moment, we have to choose. We choose who to trust, what to sacrifice, when to stay, when to leave. We choose without knowing if what we're doing will one day feel right or ruin us. We act without the wisdom of hindsight, and we hope that someday it will all make sense. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard named this paradox in a single sentence. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. It sounds poetic, but it's not comfortable, it's haunting. Because it means that everything you're doing right now, every uncertain step, every painful ending, every decision you're not sure is right, won't reveal its purpose until it's already too late to change. That's why we crave control. That's why we hesitate. That's why we sometimes freeze. Because we feel the weight of choices whose meanings haven't arrived yet. Kierkegaard called it the dizziness of freedom, the vertigo of standing at the edge of limitless possibility and knowing you have to step forward without a map. And in that dizzying space, we reach for certainty. We try to force sense out of chaos, but sense can't be forced from within the storm. It only takes shape when the sky clears, when we're far enough from the center to look back and see what was really happening. We punish ourselves for not knowing then what we understand now. We say, I should have seen it, or how could I have been so blind? But that's not stupidity, that's time, that's the structure of life itself. You cannot judge the seed for not looking like the tree. And you cannot blame yourself for not recognizing the purpose of a moment that was still becoming something else. So maybe the reason you're confused isn't because you're lost. Maybe it's because you're human. You're living forwards, as all of us must, and meaning will come later. You can't see the mountain while you're climbing it. You're too close. The dirt is in your hands. The wind is in your face. All you can do is take the next step. That's the paradox. We want to understand our lives while they're happening, but understanding demands distance, and life gives us none. Instead, it demands motion. We don't choose from a place of certainty. We choose from instinct, from fear, from faith. And the clarity we crave, why we did what we did, what it was all for, arrives only later, long after the decision is made. This is what Kierkegaard was trying to show us. That understanding is retrospective, but life refuses to wait. It insists we act now. So we make choices without knowing how they'll echo. We leave jobs, not knowing if we'll ever find a better one. We end relationships, unsure if they were really the problem or just a mirror. We say yes to things we don't fully trust, and no to things we're afraid to want. And in the absence of understanding, what do? We panic, we overthink, we stall out, we assume confusion is failure, when really it's just the cost of living in real time. This is the anxiety Kierkegaard described, the dizziness of possibility. Not a fear of what's out there, but a vertigo born from freedom itself. The knowledge that you could become anything, and you have no idea what choosing one path will do to all the others. Psychologists today echo him in different terms. They tell us that memory isn't a recording, it's a story, that we construct meaning from hindsight, that the present can't be fully understood because we're still too immersed in it. It's not that we're blind, it's that we're still inside the painting, and as long as we're inside it, all we can see are the brush strokes. But here's what's remarkable. The meaning doesn't vanish just because we can't see it yet. It's forming, quietly, beneath our awareness, like roots growing under frozen ground. Sometimes we sense it, some intuition that this moment matters, that the breakup or the failure or the detour isn't random, but more often we miss it, and that's okay, because that's how meaning works. It doesn't interrupt your life to explain itself. It waits until you've grown enough to look back and carry what it's trying to show you. Think about it. What's one decision you made that felt uncertain or even wrong, but changed your life for the better? What if the same thing is happening right now? What if the confusion you're in isn't a sign you're lost, but a sign you're in the middle of something that isn't finished yet? And maybe that's the truest thing we can say about life, that the present moment isn't where meaning lives, it's where meaning begins. And someday you'll turn around and realize you weren't wandering after all. You were drawing a map, you just didn't know the shape of it yet. It's strange how some of the most life-altering moments arrive without announcement. The job you took just to pay rent, the stranger you met in passing, the night you cried in the kitchen with no one around. They didn't feel like plot points, they felt like background noise, and yet they became turning points. Only later do we begin to understand. Only in looking back do we see that what we once called nothing was already becoming everything. This is the hidden magic of living forwards and understanding backwards. Kierkegaard wasn't offering a trick for finding peace, he was exposing the architecture of existence. That while we live in motion, blind, guessing, reaching, meaning lives behind us, assembling itself in silence. There's an old story, almost forgotten. In the early 1900s, a man named Elzéar Bouffier walked the hills of Provence with a bag of acorns and a staff. Every day he planted, one seed at a time, no audience, no grand announcement, just faith in the invisible. At first, nothing changed, but he kept planting. By the time the world noticed, it was too late to stop what had taken root. The hills had become forests, the winds had changed. Communities returned to a place they once abandoned. The barren land was alive again. It had taken decades for the meaning of his actions to come into focus. But the meaning had been growing the whole time, hidden in the soil, nurtured by patience, watered by time, and maybe the same is true for us. There are years of our lives we call lost, wasted, broken, years where nothing seemed to grow. But what if we were wrong? What if those were the years we were planting? There's a woman who once dropped out of college after a string of panic attacks and spent the next 5 years shelving books in a library. She thought she had failed. She told herself she had ruined her life, until one day a boy with a stutter came in trying to find a book on loss. She sat with him, listened, helped him find the words he couldn't find alone. She's now a therapist, and she still thinks about those 5 wasted years, not with regret, but with reverence, because that's where her roots were growing. Carl Jung believed that the self, the wholeness of who we are, reveals itself slowly, often without our awareness. We don't chase it, we unfold into it. He called it individuation, the process of becoming who you were meant to be, through all the things you didn't think mattered. James Hillman went even further. He suggested that we're born with a blueprint, a calling, a code, a daemon that quietly tugs at the edges of our life. He called it the acorn theory. That somewhere in the earliest, strangest details of our lives, what we loved, what hurt us, what we couldn't stop thinking about, there was a whisper of who we were becoming. But here's the truth, no one tells us. You don't get to know the plan while it's happening. You only see it later. Think back. What haunted you as a child? What lit you up in ways you couldn't explain? What pain stayed longer than it should have? Those aren't accidents, they're signals, threads in a pattern you can only trace once it's behind you. We don't recognize our story while we're inside it, but we can revisit it. And when we do, something shifts. The person you were at your lowest wasn't broken. They were planting something you'd one day need. The season you thought was meaningless may have been the root system of your purpose. The things that didn't make sense, they still might not, but they're part of the shape now, part of the mystery you are still becoming. So yes, life must be lived forwards, but you're allowed to turn around, and when you do, you may see what was always there, not a mess, not a mistake, but a mosaic. But before we carry the story too far, we have to slow down, because there's a trap built into all of this, one that doesn't feel like a trap, because it sounds so close to hope. It's the trap of forcing meaning too early. When we begin to look backwards and connect the dots, we risk connecting them too quickly, too cleanly. We risk turning chaos into comfort instead of truth. Psychologists call it post hoc rationalization. It's our tendency to create explanations for our past, not because they are accurate, but because they make us feel better. Because they give us control over something we didn't understand. We say everything happens for a reason, when really it just happened. We declare, that pain made me stronger, when maybe it just hurt, and we've never really admitted how much. We claim we chose the long road, when in truth we just got lost and made the best of it. There's a man who spent 15 years chasing a dream in the music industry. When it finally collapsed, he told himself it was never his passion, that it was just practice for something greater. But when he sat down with the silence, really sat with it, he realized he still loved the music. He had just been afraid to admit it had broken his heart. And so he buried the truth under a convenient story. This is what Kierkegaard never promised, that understanding backwards would always lead to clarity. He only said it was where understanding begins, but understanding requires honesty. That's what Viktor Frankl pointed to in his work. As a Holocaust survivor, he didn't believe that all suffering was meaningful. He believed that meaning was something we create in response to suffering, but only if we do it with integrity, not by pretending the pain was part of a plan, but by finding something within it that we're willing to carry forward. Arthur Schopenhauer didn't believe in redemption at all. He saw suffering as intrinsic to life. He said we invent meaning not to transcend pain, but to endure it. For him, our narratives are coping mechanisms, a way to keep going in a world that offers no guarantees. And maybe he was right, partially. Not every loss becomes wisdom, not every wound becomes a gift. Some things remain open, unresolved, sharp, but that doesn't make them meaningless. It just means we don't get to turn every scar into poetry. So how do we keep looking back without lying to ourselves? We remember this: clarity is not the same as closure. And meaning doesn't need to be perfect to be true. The stories we tell about our lives should be held up to the light, examined, questioned, rewritten if they were built on fear, not discarded but opened. Ask yourself, what part of your past have you tried to polish? What grief have you renamed too quickly? What if the truest thing you could say is that you still don't understand it? And that's okay, because understanding life backwards is not about cleaning it up. It's about finally seeing it clearly in all its contradiction, its imperfection, its ache. It's about saying, this is what happened, and this is who I became because of it. Not despite the pain, but through it. And that kind of truth, it doesn't always feel good, but it will set you free. There's a moment that doesn't come with trumpets. It doesn't announce itself. It just arrives quietly, often in the middle of something ordinary. A conversation, a glance, a still afternoon. You notice almost by accident that you've begun to carry something differently. What once felt like a wound now feels like weightless memory. Not gone, not resolved, but no longer heavy in the same way. That's when meaning arrives, not in the middle of chaos, but in the hush that follows. Not as explanation, but as acceptance. Kierkegaard didn't promise clarity in real time. He gave us a permission slip to live forward without the illusion of complete understanding, to stop waiting for the why and start honoring the what now. There's a woman who lost her brother in a car crash. She was 21, he was 18. For years, she couldn't bring herself to drive the same road. She hated her own laughter, felt guilty for forgetting the sound of his voice. She tried grief counseling, faith, yoga, anything that might make it mean something, but nothing did. Then one afternoon, years later, she sat across from a teenager whose sister had just died by suicide. The girl wasn't speaking, wouldn't eat, wouldn't cry. The woman said, "You don't have to be okay, you just have to be in the room." And the girl blinked, just once, like she'd been waiting for that sentence, that permission, and that's when it happened. Not the healing of her pain, but the redefinition of it. That's how meaning works. It doesn't erase the past, it threads it into the future. It lets you use what nearly undid you as something living, something that helps someone else breathe. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth. It's not resilience, it's not bouncing back. It's what happens when the earthquake cracks open a deeper layer of the self. When we don't just recover, but rebuild with different materials. But no one recognizes the shape of meaning in the moment it begins. It shows up behind us days later, years later, in a line we speak without rehearsing, in someone else's eyes when they say, "I thought I was the only one." The world is full of people who think they've wasted time, people who look back on entire chapters of their lives with regret. But regret is often just meaning still under construction. There's a man who spent a decade pursuing a music career that never took off. He lived in a cramped studio apartment, played dive bars for drink tickets, and eventually gave up. Now he teaches kids how to write songs, not for fame, but for expression. He says it took him 10 years of chasing the wrong dream to find the right one. He tells them, "That song you're afraid to write might be the one someone else needs to hear." Sometimes the detour is the way, sometimes the breakdown is the blueprint. Just like in The Alchemist, where Santiago travels across the world only to find the treasure buried where he began. But he couldn't have seen it earlier. He wasn't ready. He had to be changed by the journey to recognize what had always been waiting. And that's the truth most people miss. Meaning doesn't come when you beg for it. It comes when you become someone who can bear it. It arrives when the pain has settled, and the self that emerged from it is ready to see what the pain was making. So if you're still hurting, don't rush the lesson. Don't force the narrative. Some meaning can't be discovered until your hands are free enough to hold it. And if you think the story has ended, think again. Meaning may just be getting started. This is where we return to the beginning, to the sentence that framed everything. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. It's simple, but not soft. Kierkegaard wasn't offering comfort, he was offering courage. Because to live forwards means stepping into spaces where logic fails. It means choosing without knowing, trusting without proof, continuing without clarity. We are conditioned to believe we need understanding before movement, but life demands movement before understanding. We search for signs, for certainty, for someone to say this is the right decision, but those signs rarely come. What comes instead is the moment, the choice, the quiet act of staying when it would be easier to run, the decision to start again after something ended. The whisper that says, maybe I don't need to understand this yet, maybe I just need to live it. Faith, in Kierkegaard's world, wasn't dogma, it was motion, a leap not into belief but into becoming. It was the choice to walk toward a future you could not yet see, trusting that one day, if you turned around, you'd recognize the path your feet had quietly drawn behind you. That's what we're doing every day, drawing maps we can't yet read. You think you're just surviving, but survival leaves fingerprints, and one day you'll trace them back to the hands that held you through. You think you're drifting, but drift has direction too. Ocean currents don't ask your permission. They carry you to shores you wouldn't have chosen, but maybe somehow needed to reach. So live. Live forwards. Not because you know the answers, but because something sacred happens when you keep showing up in your own life. There will be days when nothing makes sense, when the past feels like a blur and the future feels like a threat, when you question every decision and wonder if you've wasted too much time. Let those days come. But don't let them stop you, because somewhere ahead of you a version of yourself is waiting. A version who can look back and see the purpose in what you're living now. A version who whispers, "Thank you for not giving up when it still didn't make sense." Maybe this moment, the one you're in right now, isn't a dead end. Maybe it's the paragraph you'll quote when you tell someone else how it all turned around. You are not behind, you are not broken, you are not late, you are becoming. And one day this will all make sense, but for now, let it unfold. Live it forwards, boldly, confused, honest, awake, and trust that the understanding will come, not today, but exactly when you're ready to carry it.